Welcome to Crossroads. I'm your host, Joshua Phillip. Today we have with us Bob Fu. He's the founder of China Aid. And this is an organization that is standing up for human rights in China. So, Bob, it's very nice to have you on the show.
Thank you, Josh, for having me.
And for those who don't know, it takes a lot of courage to stand up for human rights in China. It takes a lot of courage to speak out against the Chinese Communist Party. And Bob, I know you've been doing this for a while now, right?
Well, for 20-some years.
20-something years, there you go. I'd say in the last maybe 3 to 5 years, Chinese people have become more outspoken against the Chinese Communist Party. But 20 years ago, that was not an easy thing to do. So tell us a bit about your journey. How'd you come to where you are?
You initially, Josh, thank you for having me once again. Initially, I was, of course, a participant and one of the leaders in my university for the Tiananmen students movement. That's 30 years ago. And then, of course, out of that moment after the massacre, along with many other students leaders, we were so kind of disappointed to see the list and how the so-called people's government would send its own so-called People's Liberation Army to use tanks and machine guns and kill its own people. So we're kind of disillusioned in a sense after the crackdown. And so that's how I became a follower of Jesus Christ as a Christian. And really, after I became Christian, I realized, well, the nature of Chinese Communist Party is try to control everything that to them not with the 100% kind of loyalty to the party's interests and the party's ideology. And my wife and I were then imprisoned, and we had to, for our faith, and then we had to flee out of China about 2 years ago. And that was the start when I realized those people of faith and those human rights lawyers, when they were just trying to exercise the most basic fundamental rights for freedom of religion, the press freedom, the basic rule of law, and they were subject to from harassment to torture to imprisonment. And as a really somebody, people of faith, as somebody we cherish the freedom, how can we be silent in the face of this kind of evil? So that was kind of the start. And we started this ministry, the organization called China Aid, basically with a mission to advance religious freedom and rule of law for all in China by exposing the abuses of the persecution, by encouraging the abused, and by equipping the leaders to fight for the freedom.
Great. And so just to be clear for our viewers as well, you're a house Christian.
House church,
yes,
is kind of compared to the government-sanctioned church. Yes. So we call it house church because we don't have a building to worship.
So when the Chinese Communist Party took over, of course, they launched many movements. One of these, just for our viewers, one of these was the Cultural Revolution. Mm-hmm. And as part of these different movements, they killed monks, killed priests, destroyed temples, destroyed churches, and they created state-sanctioned versions of the religions to replace the legitimate religions. And so a lot of people who've held on to the true faiths had to go underground. And so the house Christians are, of course, the Christian version of that, where the true Christians who hold on to the real faith, instead of following the altered version of the Chinese Communist Party, and they worship on their own, and of course they're persecuted for it. So I know that's
yes, you're absolutely right. Yes. So the Communist Party, of course, kind of established its own so-called three self-patriotic movement. Churches and all the leaders were Communist Party kind of political appointees, under which all these religious services has to be totally controlled and managed by the Communist Party. And on the contrary, the house church leaders, and including the underground Catholic churches, they want to be independent to their faith, and they want to really hold their faith and the God as the utmost, value instead of the Communist Party.
Yeah, well, and that's one of the big points is that the Chinese Communist Party does not want people to recognize a power higher than it is, which is why I understand with the Catholics, for example, from what I get, they cannot recognize the Pope over the Communist Party, right? Isn't
That's
that
right.
How it goes?
Yeah. That's the major thing,
If you're a Tibetan Buddhist, you need government permission to reincarnate, right?
That's right. This is so ironical. The Communist Party said they believe atheism, and yet they appoint the kind of reincarnation of Dalai Lama, in Tibet, their own kind of a version. And in the church even, before the church kind of have their worship service, everybody is mandated to sing the national anthem. And the church would have to take down the kind of the cross and replace with the portrait of Chairman Xi Jinping, in the worship place. So last year in Henan province, when President Xi Jinping sent his so-called religious affairs inspectors to the government-sanctioned church, one inspector looked at on the wall of the one church and said, this is a kind of point to the 10 Commandments on the wall. He pointed one commandment, said, no, this is not compatible with the President Xi Jinping.
Which one was that?
It's the first commandment. And the next day, 10 commandments became 9 commandments. So is that a true Christian faith if you remove the first commandment from the 10 commandments? That will be a total different Jewish religion. Of course, it's a total different Christianity. Is no Christianity at all without the first commandment, as we all know, is to worship the one and only Yahweh, God, as our only God.
And so I know that you've done a lot to stand up for human rights overall in China, religious freedom overall in China. And so I think it's an interesting point that we've spoken about before on this show, that a lot of times people in countries where people are persecuted, they see that they are not the only ones persecuted, and they've begun to join together, right? They've begun to...
Solidarity.
Yes. So tell me about some of your work in this regard.
Yes, as a Christian, of course, we understand firsthand the persecution against the people of our faith. But, we also, especially actually my personal experience, is after I came out of China and being accepted and in this land of free in the United States, I started to, meet and realize with those people of faith who are persecuted, the Tibetan Buddhists, the Uyghur Muslims, the Falun Gong practitioners, and many others. So we realized that if we only kind of chose to speak for the persecuted faith of our own, then the Communist Party, number one, will take advantage by dividing into different groups, and by actually showing even some kind of the different policy implementation, and so that they would use one group against the other. Number two is the right thing to do for our faith, right? If one faith is not free, nobody is really free, right? How can we, turn a blind eye by keeping silent when we see, a Falun Gong practitioner just simply for practicing his or her own faith, and he or she would be arbitrarily detained, would be tortured, and many even tortured to death, and some even their organs were being harvested alive. So this is purely, is kind of a crime against humanity. So we're all created in the image of God. So as a fellow human being, this is a fundamental, human rights issue. So that's why, we are much more, powerful stronger if we are fighting together and join hands together. So that's the motivation. So we, in Washington, D.C., we established this coalition for religious freedom in China, consisting with every kind of organizations, the people of faith and groups together. So we can send a strong message, not only really to the persecuted faithful, that we do care about them when they are persecuted and imprisoned, tortured, but also to the persecutor, to the Communist Party, that we will fight for freedom of each other, and so they could not take advantage and divide us anymore. So that's the fight I have been kind of involving and leading.
Have you ever been threatened by the Chinese Communist Party or its agents abroad? I know that it's
All
very
the time.
common.
That's another issue. Josh, this summit and to join hands together is so important. It's not only the people of faith who are persecuted from China join hands together, but internationally. And the free world, should realize, wake up. Right? The Communist Party is not only posing a threat to this 1.4, billion Chinese citizens, but they extended their long arms already beyond the China's border. They are, in the corner of New York City. And yesterday, when 50 Chinese political dissidents, when they were welcoming the Taiwan President, Dr. Tsai Ing-wen, they were beaten up by the Chinese Communist Party hired thugs by 200 to 300 overseas Chinese in New York City, on the street of New York City. And at least 5 of those who were beaten up were sent to the hospital. And they are in every Confucius Institute in the major universities. And there are many of so-called scientists. They are working as double agents. They're stealing American technology. They work as harassers and intimidators to those who dare to speak, kind of courageously. So I kind of, in many occasions, met with this, even in public, Chinese agents posed as a Xinhua News kind of a reporter would follow me all the way to the toilet room and give me a card and try to intimidate me. So this is happening in the soil of the free world, from Europe, of course, in the United States.
And this is true. I've in my own work, starting in about 2008 to about 2012, I was investigating these networks for an investigative series I wrote for Epoch Times. And this is the United Front Department, right?
United Front, yeah.
And this works through the overseas, hometown associations, tongs, which underneath them are these Chinese street gangs, the triads.
Yeah, they're fully funded by the Chinese embassy and consulates, and with the monetary and material support. This so-called Overseas Chinese Students Association in every universities. They are really just part of Chinese overseas security apparatus as a spying group, working directly for the Chinese Communist Party's interest.
So this is accurate too, that the Overseas Chinese Student and Scholar Associations,
yes, that's right.
They are financed and directly controlled by the consulates. Sometimes they even state it openly on their websites.
That's right.
They don't even try to hide it, which is bizarre if you ask me.
It is. They were founded and they were here, and some even publicly declared on YouTube they form a Communist Party branch in the American university and declare their loyalty to the Chinese Communist Party in the US soil, but also starting their activities here.
Now, when it comes to the Chinese Communist Party and its persecution of religions, its persecution of dissidents and so on, how does this fit in, do you think, with the kind of goals of the Communist Party in China?
The goal of Chinese Communist Party is very clear. Is the nature of the communism is to try to dominate the world with communism, with socialism. And they have been also not shy away of declaring that. Of course, economically, they do this through the One Belt, One Road initiative. And look at, in Africa even, in Djibouti, right? They built their military. In Pakistan, in Bangladesh, I mean, they look at what they're doing. There's a so-called debt diplomacy. And militarily, South China Sea, when President Xi even, made a kind of a commitment in the Oval Office to President Obama, we won't militarize South China Sea. The next month, we see the build an artificial island with surface-to-air missile defense system already is installed. So this is the Communist Party's kind of a totalitarian system and ideology already determined. That's their dream. So I think the free world should really wake up, I think fortunately we have the administration led by President Donald Trump, and I think many of his advisors and himself finally woke up and start taking the necessary policy and specific procedures to handle this. Yeah.
Great. Anything else you'd like to say? Any kind of closing points you want to make in terms of what people should know about the Chinese Communist Party and what it's doing?
I think the nature of the Chinese Communist Party is not only limited to exercise its tyrannical authoritarian ruling inside China, but through its military might, economic might, and now the surveillance technology might. We talk about Huawei. They're extending their arms everywhere. I mean, they are intimidating. They are using that to surveillance overseas. The American citizens, the European citizens. I think through their, of course, the so-called now 5G technology, and I think it's time for us not only to wake up, but also to take actions to contend before it's too late. And look at the lessons we learned. If we learned before the World War II, the Hitlers, right? The Hitler was not like invading Poland just overnight. He had a plan already. I mean, spreading the ideology of hatred and then penetrating in different other countries and try to make the Western countries divided and involve the appeasement policy. So, my message to the free world, let's work together and to really contain this tiger before it's growing into an uncontrollable animal and became a second Hitler. It's too late.
Great. Real pleasure having you on the show.
Thank you, Josh.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Great. And everyone, please remember to like and subscribe. See you next time.